This is Father Gregory Pine, and welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcast. For this episode of Godsplaining, we are delighted, we are pleased. I don't know what a compound word composed of delighted and pleased would be. Depleased, polited, neither of them work. We're pumped to have with us Father Damian Ference. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me, Father Gregory. It's good to be here.
Hey, so I sign my emails FG. The inspiration for that is because you sign your emails FD.
Oh, thank you. Not to everybody, but to friends. I do FD, yeah. So,
how did that come about?
Well, I was ordained back in 2003, and the youth minister at the time said, hey, you know, your name has 5 syllables, Father Damian. Could we call you something like the young people called Karl Wojtyła, Father Wojtyła, they called him Wujek for uncle?
Nice.
It's just something that could come off the tongue a little easier than 5 syllables. How about FD? I said, as long as they respect my priesthood, the teens can call me whatever they want. And so it took. So a lot of the young people from my first parish called me FD, and still some young people today still do. So that's how it came about.
Cheers. Mm-hmm. I think about this sometimes because in my family, so like nicknamery is an expression of affection.
Yep.
So like nicknames aren't even fixed. Like they're in a constantly evolving state as a way to show that like I've been thinking about you and also how I can call you something fun, like affectionately, not criticizingly or pejoratively.
Right.
But like with my experiences, having been ordained a priest in the United States, culturally speaking, there's like political associations with like the availability of nicknames. So like if you say like, just call me by my first name, people have political associations with that. Or if you say like Father last name, and if you call me anything else, there's political associations with that. And it's like naive to say, I wish we could step aside from political consideration because they're always present.
Right.
But it is, I like it because it retains a sense of one's priesthood, but it's also charmingly short and available, like lay holdable.
Correct.
Which I think is like part of the logic of the priesthood. It's like God is near and you can lay hold of him.
Yeah. Yes. It's incarnational and accessible. It makes one accessible, but also respecting the fact that this is my priest who's before me. And then you get to explain why you call. I had one teen who was calling me FD, and another person said, she calls you hefty. You're not even that big. I said, no, it's FD for Father Damian. She said, oh, okay. So people like it. And we need to be accessible to our people, but at the same time, always be who it is that we're supposed to be. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay, so I have known you now for maybe 20 years. Insofar as our lives converged, because you would come to Steubenville to visit some of your parishioners. So I guess you were assigned at St. Mary's in Hudson, Ohio, which is like a kind of hotspot for Catholic life in the Archdiocese of Cleveland and for vocations. Is that right?
We're not the Archdiocese. Cincinnati is the Archdiocese, but yes, the Diocese of Cleveland.
Okay, my bad.
That's true.
Sorry.
Yes.
I keep trying to ascribe accolades.
We all make mistakes, Father.
That's right. I learned recently that there are 33 archdioceses in the United States at present.
Oh, that's a great number.
It is a great number.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, somebody had me do like a March Madness style selection process for which one has the most beautiful cathedral. I was astonished to learn that some of them have very unbeautiful cathedrals, which is bracing when you see the types of things that people build. But there's not only a history of beautiful church architecture in Cleveland, but also a history of like fervent Catholic life.
Yes, that's true.
And I've noticed that too about like the seminarians and the priest of Cleveland. Maybe that's in part because of like the arrangement of your diocesan setup where you have the minor and the major seminary just kind of in the same building, as it were.
Yes.
But like the vibes are immaculate, which is to say like the esprit de corps is very palpable. What's been your experience of that?
I think the fact that we still have 2 seminaries in our diocese is incredible.
Yeah.
Because there were threats in the 90s, like many other dioceses, we can't afford this, let's shut the thing down. We used to have a self-standing seminary, Borromeo, and in 1991, the bishop decided with the guidance of the faculty, let's keep a formation program, but we'll partner with one of our local universities, so John Carroll. But we ran the formation house, and we still teach all 10 courses for the PPF. So we do the philosophy. It afforded us to allow our priests to do different ministries because we couldn't run a whole college seminary program the way that we used to. And our numbers were a little smaller in terms of our seminary enrollment, but we kept the seminary going, and our whole diocese knows about it. So the formation certainly takes place at our minor seminary and major seminary, but we also count on our parishes and our priests, and the whole diocese is involved in forming a man to be a priest. And I think the guys very much feel like they are part of the diocese. There's a pride, from a good, healthy pride from coming from the Diocese of Cleveland. And I think there's an accountability there too, that the guys, and no offense to the regional seminaries, but our guys all study within here. And later on, if the bishop wants to send them away for studies, then they go Seaway or to Rome or somewhere else. But they're pretty much formed in our diocese, which can be pretty healthy and hold men accountable, I think.
Yeah. I think too, I mean, the character of Cleveland, like plenty of people have had plenty of things to say about places like Cleveland or Detroit, or on the East Coast like Philadelphia and Baltimore, insofar as there is a former like industrial glory and then a subsequent kind of slump. But there's something about difficult circumstances, and especially men at the same workbench in difficult circumstances, that has a way of forging community. So I've been impressed by that. I was at a wedding at one point for Ashley Maloney. And it was like all the seminarians, it was clear. It was like, we don't dance. We just hang out with each other.
Yeah. That's it. You go to the wedding reception, but when it comes to dancing, especially because people have cameras, all they need is to get one image, and then they show it on social media. Like, So it's better just to hang out with your buddies and enjoy.
So the vibes are immaculate, which I appreciate. Something else that's cool about the situation in which you live is that it's very consciously and dynamically evangelical. So it's like something that I picked up when I visited the seminary last year. It's like people aren't here to be pure X or pure Y, like pure academicians or pure pastoral types. The idea is that we're made to the image and likeness of God. We've got minds with which to know and hearts with which to love. We should be about knowing and loving the Lord, but also we should see like what shape that takes within the mission field. So a clear sense of identity, but a clear sense of mission. And you are at present assigned as the vicar of evangelization. So what's it like to have that job in that setting?
Yes, and it's actually vicar for evangelization.
Sorry.
And I had to learn that.
Okay.
Because I guess a vicar is for, a director is of.
Okay.
Distinctions.
Thank you.
I did not know what a vicar was, and I certainly took my canon law classes, but I'm the first vicar for evangelization in the Diocese of Cleveland. And traditionally, we have had a vicar general. We've had a vicar for clergy and a judicial vicar who runs the chancery and the tribunal. But my new bishop, Malesic, decided to designate a priest to be a vicar for evangelization, because that is front and center on his radar and on his stove. Like, this is where he wants things cooking. He wants to make sure that we are not confining the gospel to our churches, but being formed in our churches and our schools for the sake of mission. So I like to talk about the Mass. We come to Mass, acknowledge that we're sinners, we glorify God, we're fed by his word, we feast on his body, blood, soul, divinity, and then at the end of Mass, we are told, go in peace, glorifying the Lord by your life, or go and announce the gospel of the Lord. So sent out on mission. And in my bishop's new pastoral letter, he wants every Catholic in the diocese to identify his or her mission, his or her apostolate, whether that is first and foremost mom or dad, or whether you're dealing with those who are struggling in depression, or who are pregnant, or who are mentally ill, whatever, the poor, the disenfranchised. Find a mission, find some place to go, whether you're a teacher in the classroom. Everybody has an apostolate, everybody has a mission. So to be able to identify that. Yeah, it's an evangelical heart for sure.
I think, so the conversation as of late has been that the rate of disaffiliation, religious disaffiliation, is slowing, and that the rate of affiliation is increasing. So it seems like, if you were just to make the judgment on the basis of sociological data, it seems like secularization is kind of stalling out, or that there are positive indications that a religious revival is afoot.
Yes.
And we've seen that on college campuses, amongst evangelicals, amongst Catholics. We've seen that with OCIA numbers. We've just kind of seen that on the internet in various ways. Right. What's been your impression of this revival generation as it's taken shape in your own setting?
Yeah, we've seen it too. So anecdotally, I run a little institute in the summer called Tole Lege. It's for rising seniors, boys and girls, 17 years old. They come in, they study philosophy, theology, liturgy, culture. We keep them for a week at the seminary. The girls are in this hallway, guys in that hallway. And then we go out after class in the morning. We go out to visit historic churches. We go to the art museum. We watch film and analyze it. this last year, we were at capacity for both weeks. Also, we have OCIA program, used to be RCA, but some parishes that only had one or two, so the priest wasn't even running a class-like setting, who are calling in and saying, we now have 10 or 12. How do we do this thing? At the cathedral, we have record numbers coming into the church at the parish cathedral this year. One of my friends has 34 in OCIA, so I think that's true. Also, just seeing young people around. Gen Z, I think, is tired of the nihilism and the fatalism and the secular culture that promises everything and delivers nothing at the end of the day. And so they're very much drawn to a church that's been around for 2,000 years. I mean, this is the 1700-year anniversary of the Nicene Creed. So I've been introducing it at Mass that way. So after the homily, you sit down for a minute. Let us stand and profess our faith using a creed that's 1,700 years old, because you can't introduce it that way. You're like, whoa, yeah, that's cool. So we're seeing it. We had 8 ordained last year for our diocese, 6 ordained this year. So 14 new priests in one diocese in 2 years is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
So we're happy about that. We had a pretty good enrollment class at our seminary this year too. So yeah, the numbers are good. They're not everything, but there's certainly something.
Yeah,
and
they're
so
an
I'm
indication
seeing
of
it.
something.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think, so here we are, 2025, people reference certain like social, cultural, political failures of the last decade or two.
Yeah.
And they'll say, maybe this is in part the reason for which Gen Z is so ripe for the picking. In the sense that like people talk about our being in a post-truth dispensation. It's not so much that people are lying. It's like people aren't trying. Or with respect to like the COVID pandemic, there's just wide-scale distrust of authority,
Yep.
Political authority, scientific authority, et cetera. And so there's this real keen sense, especially as the family breaks down, civil society breaks down, like the unbuffered self can't be expected to navigate his way through this life. And so it's like, I got to hold on to something, and more people, it seems, are holding on to religion. And I think so you recently wrote a book about
Correct.
Flannery O'Connor you wrote a dissertation about Flannery O'Connor, and now you have a popular version of some of the like deepest insights from that dissertation in this popular No One Was Paying Any Attention to the Sky, made available by Word on Fire.
Wise Blood Books.
Wise Blood Books, let's go.
Word on Fire was my last book on Flannery, but
Sorry,
we'll take
okay.
it.
But I think that like Flannery offers us kind of insights into the reason for which, like she'll talk about the fact that you don't know that you need saving until such time as you know that you need saving. But
Yes.
once you know that you need saving,
Yes.
you're desperate to be saved. So I don't know, maybe you could lead us into Flannery O'Connor as not like evangelical resource, because that sounds kind of creepy. We just go back to the past so as to use things that people make available to us. But like, yeah, evangelical conversation partner for this present generation.
Yeah. So the way that I understand O'Connor is that she had 2 deep desires in her heart. One was to love God very well with all her heart, and the other was to serve God as an artist, and in her particular case, a narrative artist, writing great short stories. So she made a pilgrimage to Rome and Lourdes, I want to say in 1958, with her diocese, and she was suffering from lupus at the time. She didn't travel a lot because she was on the crutches, and this is before all the ADA stuff, so she'd have to actually walk down the steps and get on the tarmac and all that. But when she went to Lourdes, rather than praying for a physical healing from lupus, she prayed that she'd be a great writer. And she wanted to use she knew she was good, and she wanted to use all her gifts to serve God. So she was a highly disciplined woman. The last 14 years of her life, she lived on a working dairy farm with her mother. Her dad died when she was 15 of lupus. That affected her tremendously. And since she was diagnosed with lupus, she knew that she didn't have much time. And she knew she had to give her life back to God as a gift. And the way that she would do that would be by writing great fiction. So that's what she did. Every morning, she went into town with her mother, went to daily mass, then came back, ate breakfast. And then from 9 to noon every day, she would write. And she is animate that this is the way that a writer writes. You don't do anything else. You don't, today, check your email, or you don't do your dishes, or you don't even read or write other letter. When you are writing, you write, and then you're done for the day. And then you can eat lunch, take a nap, read in the afternoon, correspondence, appointments, visit with friends. But she lived a monkish type of life, highly disciplined, and was able to affect the world by making great and wonderful art that at times was misunderstood. Somebody accused her of being a nihilist, or they said she's out of her mind and she should write good kind of stories that make people feel good about themselves. She was up to making great art that affected the world and that pleased her maker. And then she also wrote letters to her friends and sometimes people that were just interested in what she was about. And she is an excellent apologist and defender of the faith. If you've not read The Habit of Being, it's a 700-page book edited by Sally Fitzgerald, one of her best friends, that allows you an insight into the woman of Flannery O'Connor, which I think helps you better understand her art. She also has a great prayer journal that she wrote during her time working on her MFA at Iowa. And so I think she's a woman who knew where the culture was, especially post-World War, and she smelled where it was going. And she believed that most of her audience were people who did not believe in God, and she was up to writing for them. And she said that at times you need to draw to a world that's almost blind, you need to draw large, startling figures. To a world that's almost deaf, you need to shout.
Yeah.
And so that's why at times her fiction can be violent, but she's not using violence for violence's sake. She's using it to wake up her reader who she thinks is asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes, at least in that collection of essays, Mystery and Manner, she'll talk about this as like territory held by the devil,
Yep.
and that what we need is redemption,
Yes.
or what we need is a kind of ransom,
Yep.
appealing to ancient and medieval understandings of atonement. But like, it's fascinating that, the weapon that she wielded was her art, and that it was specifically like she trained her mind and heart on the excellence of her art. I think, so some people might profit from, like, you think about various persons' efforts at doing something beautiful for God, and maybe those somethings are of an artistic nature, and we can kind of content ourselves with doing something with a good intention, or we can content ourselves with doing something devoutly and piously. But when it comes to art, it's especially important that the art be excellent.
Yes.
So maybe can you talk about that, like the basis of our judgment of artistry and why it was so important to her that the art be good rather than simply well-intended?
Yes. Caravaggio was an excellent artist, but not necessarily an excellent man. I think he murdered someone along the way. But there is something objectively beautiful about his art, and Michelangelo, and we could go on and on in this way. And so I think a lot of times Catholics think, well, if I have the right intentions and I tell a good story, and if I believe in Jesus and the resurrection, then that's good enough for me. But for O'Connor, she knew that having Catholic faith was certainly important, but being an artist who was able to write stories that were not just good, but great and excellent, and taking them up to this level was essential for her as a Catholic, because she thought that that was her vocation. So she had to be good at what her vocation was calling her to do, which required a high amount of discipline and also required a high amount of revision. So you can go to her archives in Georgia and see that this is where she started A Good Man Is Hard to Find, or where she was writing Wise Blood. But then she was sharing what she was writing with other experts and friends to receive feedback, to take what was good to make it great or to make it excellent. And she wasn't satisfied until she had the form, or she had the story where it needed to be, where it reached the point where she could rest and say, this is complete, because it's no longer simply good or mediocre or okay, but this is very fine or at the point of excellence.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
No,
yeah.
that's...
Yeah. And I guess it depends upon your craft, how you get to that point.
Yep.
But one of her ways was she earned an MFA, so she learned craft, and she had great mentors and she had great friends who were able to assist her in her writing. And I even think with some of the revisions, she would say, you're right on this, I need to change this, but no, you say I should do this, I'm holding to this because this is essential for this character to think this way, or he has to say this, or she has to look this way in this particular story.
Yeah.
So to be confident in what you're doing, but also open to getting better at what you're doing as an artist,
Yeah, I think, for the listener just thinking of, okay, let's say that I've only been given a modest amount of talent and I want to apply that talent as well as I can. Good. I think that the point is, like, we should do what we can with what we have. And there's a difference to art and prudence. Like when it comes to art, we may be limited as, visual artists or as short story writers or as composers of opera. But if we feel drawn in that direction, whether for leisure or for avocation, we should work to develop our talents so that they are as well refined as they can be, given our own kind of limitations. But I think it also reveals something about prudence in the sense that, the product of art is the art itself. It's the artifact. Whereas the product of prudence, in a certain sense, is the man. So like we're working on a kind of moral refinement whereby we become more so whom God intends us to be. We become more free in making choices, even as we come to a recognition that the choices are always going to be limited. So I think that there's different kind of lessons to be learned about human freedom from the artist and from the wise man or from the practically wise man.
Yep.
But I think that something that's beautiful about her is that she had both. And that she had them in a kind of beautiful confluence. I don't know if you can speak to that.
I can. So I think when talking about virtue, it's so helpful to use examples of music, art, language, athletics, especially. So if someone is naturally gifted, I'm from Cleveland, so LeBron James brought us a championship in 2016. You can say what you want about him as a man, but he's a tremendous athlete who works on his art, on his craft in order to, he's still playing basketball today. He's not my favorite player anymore, but I certainly respect him because he brought a championship to Cleveland. He was very good as a basketball player. There are other musicians who are fine musicians and at the top of their game, yet can be imprudent human beings. So living promiscuous life or being drunks or however you want to frame their vice. So one can be a virtuous artist or a virtuous musician or virtuous at language, right? You have a mastery of several languages, but you can still be incontinent human being because you haven't worked on your humanity. But the way in my experience, it's easy to make the transition if you know what it takes to be a good athlete, or you know what it takes to be a good writer, or you know what it takes to be a good musician, that you have to be disciplined. You have to know the rules of the game and play them in such a way where you become free by playing them. Well, what about living as a human being, generally speaking? What does it mean to be a good human? You know what it means to be a good artist. You know what it means to be a good linguist. You know what it means to be a good musician. How does that translate to being a good human, to being a prudent man, right? Prudent woman. And I think that's how that works.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Flannery was both.
Yeah. There are various things that you see throughout the course of her life which testify to a certain strength of character. There's a classic example where she's gathered around a table with a bunch of high society types, amongst whom she probably wanted to establish herself, and then they're making kind of lighthearted, blasphemous commentary about the Most Holy Eucharist, to which she famously responds, if it's just a symbol, to hell with it. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of incisiveness and a kind of clarity of vision, but you don't get that clarity of vision unless you've trained your appetites, unless you're temperate, unless you're courageous, unless you're just. Because if you're constantly being pulled this way and that by whatever passing good, whether it be, like some crass sense pleasure, or whether it be the respect of those with whom you hope to ingratiate yourself, you're not going to have that same incisive clarity, and you're not going to be able to deploy it. But it strikes me that even though she was hindered by her illness, and even though the circumstances of her life are relatively modest and often enough hidden, yet she's free. She's a free woman. Yeah.
If you want to be great at anything, then you have to say no to quite a few things in order to give your one big yes to this sort of thing. So, I remember as a grade school kid, I had a few classmates who were figure skaters.
Nice.
And they had to get up early in the morning to get to the ice rink at 5 a.m. Why would you ever want to do that? But then you actually go see them ice skate and you say, oh my gosh, all that hard work paid off there. They had to say no to parties and they had to say no to other sports and other activities so that they can do this one thing. And in many ways, the Christian does that. You say no to certain things. Not some of these certain things are always off limits. They're bad in and of themselves. But other things, you just said, I can't do all these things. if I want to do this one thing well. So I'm going to limit myself so that I can throw everything into this basket so that I can flourish and be a great human and a great writer, great priest, great teacher, whatever it is that you're called to be. But yeah, O'Connor has a line. What does she say? Vocation requires limitation, but it takes an artist to understand that. So you put limits on yourself so that you can flourish. It's the old cliche about the banks of a river. When you have banks, it allows that river to flow quickly,
rather than to flood the whole delta.
Right.
Okay, thinking about specifically like some of her insights as a storyteller, I think that, as human beings, we're living our lives. We're also interpreting our lives. We're trying to make sense of them as a coherent story. And sometimes there's acute pain and suffering born of the recognition that we can't make sense of them. You can think about the way in which we formulate our prayers to the Most High God. It's like, what is going on? Why is this happening rather than something else? One thing I love about Flannery O'Connor is that she has a real trust or confidence in the genre, which is to say, like, people would ask her, for instance, like, what's the point of your story?
Yeah.
And her answer was always like, read the story.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Like, it's condensed speech, right? It's already been cooked down.
Right.
The point isn't to like go here and to pull out some life lessons. The point is to suffer it. Like, the point is to read it. The point is to accompany it in a certain sense as your life takes shape. So maybe, can you speak a little bit about the narrative quality of our lives?
Yeah. I heard a quote recently that Leonard Cohen read a poem once, and then someone raised their hand and said, "What does that poem mean?" And he paused, and then he read the whole poem again. Yeah, so oftentimes when we're in it and when we're in our lives, they don't make sense. I remember Bishop Barron giving a talk on God as artist, and it's very Thomistic, in that if you try to make sense of your life as you're going through it, that's a great desire, but oftentimes you need to suffer, using your word here, your life experiences, and be faithful to God, even and especially if you don't feel like being faithful to God, or you have a sense, God, where are you? You've abandoned me. I mean, read the Psalms. This is a constant cry. Like, tell me, Lord, like, have you forgotten me? And this is the virtue of long suffering. I've read recently, is it called, you would know,
Longanimity?
Longanimity, yeah. It's a great, I mean, we should bring that back into the lexicon.
Yeah.
So being able to endure and suffer and stay faithful to God, even and especially if you don't feel his presence. Like, I go to Holy Hour and I don't feel anything. Blessed are you. Stay in it and keep letting God know what you're feeling, what you're enduring, and pray your prayers and stay in community. Do all those things that you need to do, because oftentimes the Lord will share his own experience of his suffering with us. And it's only after you've made it through, I mean, this is living the Paschal mystery, that process of dying, you feel like you're actually dying, then you offer that up to God. You make that your act of praise. Like, Lord, I don't feel like you're anywhere around. I don't sense you, but I'm here. I'm showing up because I know you said you are here, and you are always here, and you're present, especially in the Eucharist. Eventually, you'll make it through that to an Easter Sunday experience, the experience of the resurrection, have some consolation. And I'm not a spiritual director, but I know this is true for my own life, that when I look back on those moments that were most dark and I made it through out on the other side, I said, Lord, I mean, and it sounds like the Footprints poem now, but there is something to the fact that God never abandons us, even though sometimes we place so much emphasis on, well, if I'm not feeling anything, it must not be working. I have to run from this. O'Connor was keenly aware that God was present in her life. And even sometimes if she struggled with it, she told him about it. Mm-hmm. So if you read her prayer journal, what she's going through, she is not keeping to herself. She's telling God what she thinks. She's telling God what she feels. She's telling God where her heart is. And that is great prayer, because that's what God wants. He wants relationship with us. And so oftentimes it's after that long suffering that we're able to look back and say, all right, Lord, it makes sense now what you were doing with me and with my heart and with my mind and with my whole being. I certainly didn't feel any of that there, but I see it now. And the more you do that sort of thing, I'm 49 years old now, the more when you go through it, you can trust, all right, I've been here before. I know how this works. It becomes easier because you've already done it. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah.
How about you, Father Gregory?
I'm thinking of specifically Flannery's ability to demonstrate beautiful insights, but also like beautiful transformation in the midst of the most difficult moments.
Yeah.
And, like not to spoil too many stories, but sometimes it's when a gun is trained on your chest, or
True.
sometimes it's when you're being gored by a bull, or sometimes it's when you hesitate to raise your voice because you suspect that the accident that is about to happen might simplify your life,
Yes.
or it might be a book thrown across a waiting room. It's just like the things that she portrays, like you said, are often violent,
Yep.
but it's often in those moments where the persons who experience the transforming power of a kind of grace, whether we're speaking about it in the strict sense or in a more loose sense,
Right.
have their lives and the meaning of their lives brought to bear. I think that like a lot of times we don't recognize the degree to which we're spending most of our energy trying to avoid discomfort. We spend like a lot of energy trying to avoid
Yes.
discomfort,
Yep.
or just like coping, managing, doing whatever it is that we need to do in order to like affirm at some level, like this is good enough.
Yep.
When truth be told, like that's not to say that we should just be one big open wound until such time as Jesus draws us home.
Right.
But it is to say that like we should be curious about what's actually going on in our life.
Yep.
And we should be honest about what we find.
Yep.
Because if we're always taking a kind of medicine so as to deal with the symptoms, but we're never actually addressing the root cause, then we'll always just be getting by. But our condition will probably slightly worsen in the sense of like the alienation and the isolation will probably become more acute until such time as it becomes unavoidable.
Right.
And so I think there's something like, again, you don't want to be the type of person which, when asked, like, how are you doing? You're like, it's like polite company.
right.
This is America. You say good, move on.
Yeah.
But like when given the opportunity, especially in the presence of the Lord and in the presence of those who are there for it, like your friends,
Yeah.
you should be able to say like, I don't know. Like, I don't actually know what's going on.
Yeah.
And there's like, without being heavy-handed about like, behold the mystery, I think that Flannery gives the reader a certain freedom to experience his or her life in its complexity, and some people will say like, in a way that's heavy-handed. I don't think it's heavy-handed. I think Chesterton's heavy-handed. I think in a way that's elegantly done, like, because her characters, they're real people, they're not like themes on stilts.
Right.
They're like, they're us.
Right. And none of them are good.
Yeah.
They're all except for a priest and a few stories and a sister, but most of her characters would be difficult to be friends with.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to know if you're understanding O'Connor well, one of the ways you know you are is if you're laughing because her stories are very funny. The second way is the character that irks you most, that you can't stand and annoys you, you realize, man, that's me. That's me. Darn it. Yeah, I've got a thick head. I'm full of pride. I think I know everything. I think I'm a good Christian. And then I realize I'm not, and I need help, and I'm constantly dependent upon God's mercy and love. And I think that's where it's at. And she does an excellent job at that. So.
Yeah. I think about that especially with the enduring chill, which again, not to spoil too many stories, but the main character is a brat, a kind of like antinomian brat, which is this hyper stylized word for like he'll have no truck with the laws, he'll have no truck with the traditions because he knows better. Yes. And so he does stupid stuff and encourages other people to do stupid stuff, which ruins products but ultimately ruins his own health. Yes. And so like he's gotten to this point of histrionic nihilistic discursion on his own fragile state, and he's gotten himself to the point where he thinks that he's really made sense of the existential mess, which is the human condition. But it turns out he just drank bad milk.
Right.
And it takes a kind of battle-hardened priest to come to his bedside and say like, nah, it's not that big of a deal, you know?
And that character shows up over and over again in O'Connor's fiction. And many think that that's her reflecting on herself and writing to herself too, that you have an overly educated child living alone at home with, usually it's a mother, and recognizing the hubris that can take place with folks who have read a lot of books and thought deep thoughts. apart from the great mystery of the incarnation and our redemption, and thinking that I can put those things aside because I'm living above these things. But at the end of the story, the Holy Ghost has his way, right?
He does.
Yeah. In a very mundane stain in a ceiling.
Exactly. Okay, well then let's turn to your recent work. If you wouldn't mind, just maybe sketch the argument of your dissertation, and then talk about how your dissertation informed the publication with Word on Fire, and then the publication with Wise Blood.
So I wound up in Rome in fall of 2018.
Okay.
Which I mentioned that because that was the same semester that Father Thomas Joseph White landed in Rome in 2018, and I heard the name, and I knew something about hillbilly Thomists and all that business. Anyway, I did my license here at CUA, so I had to do a semester of classes, then a Lectio Quorum project. At the end of that first semester, then I thought, they say when you write a dissertation, you should write on something you love and that won't bore you. And I absolutely love Flannery O'Connor, and I wanted to do a study on the philosophical foundations of her narrative art. And I thought, if anyone would lead me in this, that would be a great gift. And so I emailed Father Thomas Joseph White and said, would you do this? And he said, how could I not? So I was like, yes. So started writing the dissertation. First chapter was an overview of O'Connor. Then the second chapter is what this book turned out to be. It was on O'Connor and modernity. And I'll give you an insight into my life that I think is very helpful for people to understand and to keep them encouraged. So the first draft of the chapter I wrote wound up being about, 28 pages. And I sent it in to Father White, and a week or two later, he sent it back, says, this isn't good enough. You rely mostly on Descartes and O'Connor's influence of Etienne Gilson, which is fine, but modernity is much broader than that, and you need to show your reader that that's the case. So he assigned me about 2,000 pages worth of books, probably 6 books. And he said, I need you to read all these, rewrite that entire chapter using the information you find in here as footnotes, and see what you could do. So the chapter doubled in length. And then that wound up being a setup for the last 3 chapters, which is O'Connor's metaphysics, her epistemology, then her ethics. So defended the dissertation, came back home. Word on Fire was interested in publishing the part of the dissertation as a book, a revision. So I had a 138,000 word dissertation, and I had to get it down to 80,000. So I just pulled out that whole second chapter, and I thought, well, maybe one day something will happen with this, and revised that. Anyway, published that book. You need to get blurbs sometimes when you publish a book, somebody who's an expert to say, hey, this was nice. It's a great book. So one of the guys I asked was a guy named Joshua Wren, who is the head of the MFA program down at University St. Thomas in Houston. And he's the founder of Wise Blood Books. And he emailed me maybe 6 months after the book was published. He said, Father, have you ever written anything on Wise Blood? And I said, it's funny you should ask, because my second chapter was on O'Connor and modernity. And at the end of that, I do a philosophical analysis of Wise Blood. And he said, could I have it to read? And I said, sure, just don't share it. Or you could share it with your students. So he taught Wise Blood, used a little bit of what I had written. And at the end of the semester, he said, could we publish this as one of our contemporary essays? So this is like a monograph. It's part of a series. I think they have 20 or 22 now from Wise Blood. And he said, would you be open to that? I said, are you asking if I could get 2 books out of my dissertation? Absolutely. So it went through some heavy revision, but basically I showed that there are four big movements in modernity that O'Connor was aware of. And her understanding of modernity, I argue, was formed by her reading of Romano Guardini and Etienne Gilson. And so the self as the center of existence rather than God, resistance to things that are mysterious, favoring the abstract over the concrete, and then finally the subordination of reason for sentiment, romanticism, feeling. And those are the 4 main movements that I find in O'Connor's fiction, and I argue are most present in Wise Blood. So that's the book. It's about 100 pages. It's a pretty fun read, I think. And people tell me that I don't use jargon that will keep them away from understanding what I'm trying to do. So hopefully that's a nice little summary for you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think when a lot of our listeners hear modernity or modern philosophy, contemporary philosophy, there's just a kind of wholesale negative association. Right. Nevertheless, it is, proverbially speaking, the water in which we swim.
True.
So we are inextricably bound up with modernity. And to the extent that we are reflective about that, it might help us to be kind of more profitably bound up with modernity, to the extent that that's possible. So I think often of Father Vincent McNabb, who said, if you don't love your people, don't preach to them, or you can only preach to people whom you love in a certain sense. And so if you have kind of contempt for the modern or contemporary condition, it really undoes you as a witness, right? As a teacher, as a preacher, but I think as a lover of men.
Yeah.
And so what like just kind of in your findings, apropos of her engagement with modernity, are there ways in which, like, not to make comparisons, like the modern world is better than the medieval or ancient world, but in the sense of like, what are the things that it kind of sensitized you to, or what kind of appreciations did it give you for the modern and contemporary condition?
So number one, understanding the modern or contemporary condition, as I mentioned before, that O'Connor was very well aware that for most of her audience, and a lot of the people she was studying with at Iowa, did not share her Catholic faith, did not share a lot of her morals and values, especially when she went over to Yaddo, which was an artist colony in New York. They were partying, they were promiscuous. There was a lot of this going on. And she was well aware of how people were living and how they were understanding the world and what they thought of organized religion and what they thought of Catholicism, that this was no longer necessary. We've made our way into an era where science has saved us, where there is no human nature to be known. And she didn't condemn her peers for believing these things, but she was very attentive to trying to figure out how I can take what is true and what is good and present this in a way that will actually be attractive, or I don't want to use the word palatable, but interesting and evocative, and that would capture their imaginations and their heads and perhaps their hearts in such a way. Like it's Aristotle, that which is known according to the mode of the receiver. So it's very important to know where people are in order to have some traction to enter into their lives. This Father McNabb, I don't know who he is, but as you said that before, I was thinking, so you have to love the people you're preaching to. I was even thinking the priest himself better love himself, or else he's going to be nasty in his own preaching. So I'm thinking that too in terms of O'Connor. I think she had a good sense of herself. I think she had a good sense of herself as saved by God in relationship with God, and therefore was not dismissing the modern or postmodern condition. This is where people are today. They have been formed by these ideas. However, she's not blessing or ordaining many of the ideas. She's calling a lot of them out, but able to take the perennial tradition and show how it's able to enter in through a gun, or through someone getting her legs stolen, or, as you say, being gored by a bull, or running a tractor into a tree and catching on fire and guys' shoes falling off. So I think she is knowing her audience and knowing the human condition and knowing the particular condition of modernity and knowing her faith so well that she's able to speak into it in a credible way. And we know this is true because we're in the year 2025 and she died in 1964, and her stories, her fiction, is becoming more relevant today than it even was then. So she had a prophetic vision for where things would be heading.
So one kind of follow-up question I want to ask. So you made reference to her prayer journal, which shows a high degree of like kind of emotional and psychological sensitivity in service of kind of spiritual abandon. But what's something that's fascinating, I think, about her fiction is that there isn't too terribly much of the emotional and psychological narration. It's almost like it's like a little bit of a return to the bios genre. It's almost like reading the gospel in a certain sense. You come to an appreciation of what people think and feel on the basis of what they do.
Yes.
So there's like a little bit of introspect, but not a ton. As we come to appreciate with like an author like David Foster Wallace, for instance, where you live in between the ears of the subject for extended periods of time, and it's almost as if the action is secondary to emotional and psychological considerations. So it strikes me that there's a kind of like get on with life simplicity, at least to her storytelling style. I don't know if that corresponds with like the cure, as it were, or the medicine that we, as moderns or contemporary types, perhaps need take in order to get beyond something of our malady.
Yeah. I've heard you speak of this before, and I think this is a very important theme, that for the modern, we can get so turned in on ourselves and so much into analyzing our thoughts, rather than continuing to live the life that we've been called to live, which sometimes seems boring. But yet the people who are most free, again, back to the conversation as an artist or a musician, linguist, or most free in human living, the saints, are moving they know where they're heading, they know their telos, they're on their way there, and you trip up, you go to confession, you keep moving, you are fed up by the body and blood of Christ, you're doing your study, you're doing your reading, you have your friends, but you're not overly analytic of your own life. You're aware of what you're doing, but you do keep moving. And I think you're right. O'Connor does that. I don't know if I've thought about it in that way before, but she shows us what her characters think mostly by the actions that they do. We get a little bit from her narrator, and sometimes the narrator isn't as reliable as other times, but I think you're right. I think that's right. I do have to give it more thought to give a very coherent answer, but that's what I can give you now.
That's right. Mm-hmm. All right. As we approach the end, maybe some like lightning round questions. So the first, whatever it is, like 4, 5, 6 stories that we have in her collected stories from, I think a lot of them are taken from the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Right.
Are those good stories or bad stories?
They're not her best stories. I mean, they helped her earn an MFA from Iowa.
Sure.
But I probably wouldn't start with those stories, even though they're listed first, because I believe they're listed chronologically in the complete stories. My favorite one of those is the turkey. I've written a little bit about that. I gave a paper at Chicago a while back on Pope Benedict and Flannery O'Connor, and going against the vagueness of Christianity, and that Christianity is very specific. And it's Ruler, I think, R-U-L-E-R, is the protagonist in that story, and he's a young kid, and he's out in the field, and he starts using the Lord's name in vain. It seems like he's cussing, but what we realize is that the Lord's name has power, and it's actually turning into a prayer. And his life is changed by the end of the story, because he realized what he thought was a joke is no longer a joke. And O'Connor does a lot of that in her stories. God's name is a joke. Baptism's a joke. It's not a joke. But she starts out with that. That's where a lot of people are in their understanding of Christianity. So taking a joke and then showing, oh my gosh, that's real. Yeah, which is good.
Okay, we'll say this, for the sake of the Wise Blood folks. All right, do you think, so for those listening at home, Flannery O'Connor wrote 2 novels?
Yes.
Is that right?
Well, and started working on a 3rd, but never finished it.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Why did the heathen rage? Yeah.
Okay, cool. Is Flannery O'Connor a good novelist?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know if I would say she's excellent, but I think Wise Blood, I used to think that what is Matthew 11:12, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven. The Violent Bear It Away, her second novel, I've often thought that was her better novel, but the farther we get away from O'Connor's death, I think Wise Blood's a better. I think it's a more prophetic novel.
Okay.
I do. It's weird and it's fun, and I think I like it. So I think she's a good novelist. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I know this is quick round, and
No, you're fine.
Stuttering.
I'm here for it as long as it takes. So the next question is, what is your favorite short story?
Right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it switches. Probably The River.
Okay.
Yeah, are you familiar with that one?
I mean, I've probably read it once, but what's it about?
Harry Ashfield. He grows up in the city. His parents, they live in an apartment. There's a abstract painting in there that is disgusting to his babysitter, who takes him out to the city. He didn't know who Jesus was until he reads a little book, and then she takes him to the river to get him baptized. And I won't say too much more than that, but the baptism certainly changes him and redirects his life.
It does, and it saves him in a certain sense.
It certainly does, yes.
Okay, if you were to make, abstracting from, like where you are in your current walk with her, what do you think is her best short story?
a good question. Many people would say Revelation, but I want to say Good Country People. Final answer.
That might be the most convicting. Not that like short stories are necessarily for conviction's sake, but like to find in your heart the presence of a little bit of hatred is a bracing thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but when you find it there, you're like, oh, that can't be me.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it is me.
Yeah.
That's me.
It leaves you horrified. I mean, she's left with one leg to stand on, which is a pun. And a lot of her stories, they become puns. But yeah, that's one. If you haven't read it, you need to read. When I teach Nietzsche to my seminarians in our 19th and 20th century continental philosophy class, we read Good Country People. And then they say, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating because like she said, she's not a hillbilly nihilist. She's a hillbilly Thomist. Mm-hmm. But she can out-nihilize the nihilists.
That's it.
You know? And I think that's a profound testimony to the power of the faith. It's like the nihilist says, I look into the void and the void smiles back, or I look into the void and maybe that's just the end of the sentence. But I think the Christian is able to say, I look in the void with the confidence that irrespective of whether or not anything happens, there is one who holds me in that moment. You know, and that gives you a real security to describe your experience of the void, which I think that the secular person doesn't necessarily have.
Agreed.
Which is just it's a delight. I mean, it can be like a harrowing delight, he says, while living in the United States of America in 2025. You know, how much has he suffered? Not much. But, you know, it's not nothing. Yeah.
And I think for those who find, do you say nihilism or nihilism?
I probably say both. I just alternate. Yeah.
Well, for those who find nihilism or nihilism attractive and think it's cool and fun, O'Connor has a different story to tell you, because she wants to show you that your heart does not desire nothing. Your heart does not desire emptiness. Your heart does not desire meaninglessness, which is where I think a lot of people are. And we go back around to your original question, or one of your original questions about why young people are drawn to the church these days, because that's left them so empty. No one wants that. You're made for a full life and a fullness of life, not nothing.
Yeah. And
O'Connor's well aware of that, and she uses her art to wake. Oh my gosh, yeah, I need to change my ways.
Yep. Yeah, but because it's often enough, the nihilist or the nihilist uses forms of, or literary genres like unmasking or protest as a way by which to show that your fundamental commitments don't amount to anything. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, Flannery can do that. She can do that literary move, but there's present in it a real love and an affirmation. It's not pure negation.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't leave you with pure negation.
Right.
There's a kind of affirmation of what is meaningful, and sometimes in very tender ways.
Yeah.
You know,
even at the end of that story, when Manly Pointer is leaving, it's something like he's going across, it looks like the speckled pond, like he's walking on water. So again, spoiler alert, just read the stories anyway. But oftentimes this suffering, this violence that one endures, it is that very moment that allows one to turn back to God, because I'm left standing on one leg. I'm done. I need help. I finally need help. I can't be self-sufficient anymore. And that's where the character winds up at the end. And it's maybe God and his permissive will allowed that to happen so that I could make this great return. O'Connor says in her prayer journal that sin can be a great thing if it brings us back to God. And she's not saying sin is good and don't sin, but oftentimes when one sins, you find yourself so lost. I have to turn back now, the prodigal son. So.
Okay, to this point, we've mentioned a handful of books of hers. So we've said that you can do complete short stories. The two main collections are Good Man is Hard to Find, and then Everything That Rises Must Converge. And then she's got the two novels, Wise Blood and The Violent Bear It Away. And then we've got the collection of essays, Mystery and Manners. We've got the collection of letters, The Habit of Being. We've also got the books that you have written, so the two that have been published by Word on Fire and then Wise Blood Books. But where would you recommend that people start if they're just getting into Flannery?
I think it depends on who the person is.
Okay.
Because the stories can be harsh and hard for people. So if they said, I can't handle all that violence right now, start with her letters. A lot of people read her letters as a devotional, or start with her prayer journal. Her essays and Mystery and Manners are also a good starting point if you're into reading essays. I think her best work, hands down, are her stories. But one great way to read stories is not to read them by yourself. So either in a book, like read them with friends, or read them on your own and then get together with a friend and talk about what's going on there. I think that's so helpful and so necessary in our world today, where we go online to hear other people talk about things. It's great to read books and then get together with people in person and talk about them. And you may have new insights that you wouldn't have had otherwise. I love, right now I'm reading Augustine's Confessions with the young adults at our cathedral young adult group. And a lot of them are finding things I didn't recognize. That's pretty good. And we're learning together. So I would, if you want her at her best, start with her stories. That's what I would say. Oh, you didn't mention she also has 2 books of cartoons.
Really?
Yeah, she was a cartoonist for her college newspaper.
Get out.
And she was an excellent cartoonist. And when she went to Iowa, she went to study journalism, but then about a week in changed her mind and wanted to join the writer's workshop. But yeah, she wanted to be a journalist at first. And she sent some of her cartoons to the New Yorker and they got rejected.
Okay.
However, she saved all her rejection letters, which I think is great. And I've done that too with my writing. I think that's an important thing to know too. Like, if you want to be a writer, you're going to have people reject your writing sometimes. That's okay. Just keep going, keep moving. As you say, keep moving on. Don't get too worried about yourself.
That makes me think of Dorothy Sayers, who, like early 20th century, kind of part of the set with folks like Iris Murdoch, or even she was like in kind of communication with the Inklings to a certain extent. But she, I think, started as a publicist. Like, she would make sketches for advertisements. I think this might be apocryphal, and people can correct me in the comments so as to police the discourse. But I think that image of like the bird of like toucan or something like that, who's drinking a Guinness, but like the Guinness glass appears in his neck. I think that she was somehow involved in that.
Really?
I think so, because she's got like 9 detective fiction novels with Lord Peter Wimsey as her protagonist, and one of them takes place in an advertising agency, and I think a lot of it is a reflection of her experience of the business. But obviously better known, I think, in Catholic circles for her translations of Dante and for those books and stuff. But yeah, she's a cool lady.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, I know this is your show, but when you came to Cleveland, you mentioned this, and a couple times you've said something that's close to it. Do you, like, in Dominican spirituality or in your understanding of discipleship, is there an element of stoicism, this movement where you keep moving on and you don't get too high or too low? There is a stability to the Dominicans that is very attractive to me as a diocesan priest, and I'm honored to have studied at the Ange for 3 years, and I think I picked up on some of that, but I have not been able to articulate it well. Does that sound like something right or no?
Yeah, I think my inclination would be to call it a kind of monastic spirituality.
Okay.
So I think that like medieval spiritualities are typically rooted in ancient spiritualities.
Okay.
And I think that like a very important book for St. Dominic and for St. Thomas Aquinas was the Conferences of St. John Cassian. So it's like, we attribute the founding of Western monasticism to St. Benedict.
Yep.
But a century before, or half century before, we have St. John Cassian, who goes to the desert of Egypt, and he and his friend Germanus have all these conversations with all of these different men, often living in isolation, and just kind of profits from the wisdom that they have accrued in seeking to live for the Lord and kind of do dread battle with the evil one. And a lot of it just focuses on the regularity of spiritual exercise, or just kind of the regularity of observance.
Yeah.
So it just tends to be a little less introspective, and it tends to be a little more take confidence that the form of the life, as communicated to you by those who have lived it before you, is coherent, and that it imparts a saving shape to your existence. So I think that like there's a kind of fear on the part of many that they have to invent their spiritual lives, or that they have to continually like salvage their spiritual lives. Whereas I think there's a kind of quiet certainty or confidence that comes with the recognition that holy people before have lived in this manner, and I do well to try to live in this manner. Yeah.
You keep the vows keep you. I think that's so, it's simple, it's attractive. I think it's good. So.
Boom. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. We've come to the end. So if folks want to follow up with you and with your work, are there particular places, particular outlets that they can do so?
Yeah. I'm on Instagram and X at FR Ference. So Father Ference. And I have a new podcast called Catholic Pour Over, where we pour over, Pore, but it's a pun, over things that are going on in the culture. And so whether it's film or books or music or things like that. And I think that's about it. I'm often on the noon mass at St. John's Cathedral in Cleveland. So if you're a live streamer, if you're interested in that sort of thing, but yeah.
That's right. All right. We'll link to the podcast and then to the books in the show notes. And so people can follow up with you there.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Peace and everything good.
Good to be with you. All right. Turning to you, the listener, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Godsplaining. If you haven't yet, please do like the episode and then subscribe, whether on your audio channel or your video channel. Unless you have found that Godsplaining is creeping into the requisite time for silence to be with the Lord, upon which don't like and don't subscribe, maybe even unsubscribe, because it's good that you move on from podcasts and move into a deeper relationship with the Lord if now's the time. And it's always the time. Other opportunities for things that you can do. We've got events coming up. So check out godsplaining.org. Check out the events tab. We've got merch if you want to like kit out your family with cool things that are, marketed. And then I think those are the main things. Oh yeah, we're on the ordinary social media outlets. Oh, and if you in your generosity would like to contribute to the podcast, we're super grateful for that, and you can do so at patreon.com/godsplaining. We were especially generous with events and retreats this past year, which means that I set all of the prices too low. So if you're thinking about donating, now is a good time, and we're super grateful. Okay, know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time at Godsplaining.